that and others, is your data you're actually sharing with the AI being breached out there? And, or is it just the models? And so those are kind of some topics, some interesting topic I think it'd be great to talk about in the future.
We
It's like,
managed to lightly cover it with Melissa, that
yep,
if you're not providing AI tools, someone else will. But I
yep,
think the great example was it Disney with Slack, where they
yeah,
just brought in their own model from elsewhere that was actually malicious.
yeah, which is actually ironic too. So it's kind of like I think it's that tread softly, understand what you're using, and but if you take the approach of some companies of zero AI, you're going to get left behind. And I think that's that's kind of what really where it ends up being. But anyway, that being said, we are at time, everybody. So again, thank you everyone for joining today's edition of Salesforce Security Office Hours with the famous Mike uh, Beech, and we are going to get going here, where we're going to be talking about, ironically, Mythos release and what does it have to do with Salesforce's attack surface. So just we're going to go through a little bit. Here's the agenda as always. Pretty much the same thing as normal. So we'll just pop through over to let's talk about really quick for the newbies. And sorry, people, if you've heard this a million times, but what is Salesforce Security Office Hours? So basically, Salesforce Office Hours is really was started because of the ever expanding threat that's out there of Salesforce organizations are keep getting breached. It's not getting smaller, it's getting bigger. We're seeing new ones every single week. So I wanted to create a forum so people could connect with experts in the ecosystem to learn what are the up and coming things you should be thinking about or learn in from a security standpoint in Salesforce, and having a direct access to those experts. So every couple of weeks, you can ask direct questions, to those experts of the burning things you have and your concerns you have with the security of your Salesforce environments. All right, so let's go move to next one. So just a couple of few rules of engagement: be respectful for others. Don't talk over somebody. If we are not talking, feel free just to talk up and ask a question. That's why everyone can talk, or raise your hand, ask a question. The QA will will answer your questions. The most important thing is taking notes. Make sure you're walking away with something actionable today that you can use in your organization, and that's why we're doing this. About myself, my name is Matt Meyers. I am the CEO and founder of EzProtect and a certified technical architect. I have more than 19 years experience in the Salesforce ecosystem, and I'm author of the best-selling book, Securing Salesforce Digital Experiences. Usually I have a book up here, but today I forgot my book. But anyway, and I'm also a founding member of the Low Code Security Alliance, and really my mission in life is to help people understand what they need to be thinking about to keep their data safe in Salesforce. Beach, I'll let you do your own intro.
Yeah, I'm Beech. I'm quite new relatively to the Salesforce experience, been doing it for a couple of years plus, but I've had a huge amount of experience in security and technology and brought it across. And
Cool.
yeah, you can hit me up on LinkedIn to dive into it deeper, but
Yep,
I think that about covers it.
sounds good. And I'm sorry for 1 second, my monitors just fell down, so I have to grab them really quick.
Perfect.
I
But
cannot
yeah,
advance
if
the
you've not
slide
read
deck.
Matt's book, certainly with everything that's happened with digital experiences, it's where I learned a lot of where there's the secrets behind the APIs, things like Lightning, and then being able to get requests out, and really why you want to be thinking about things like guest users and public sharing models and things. So it's
Yep,
well worth a copy, especially right now at the moment.
exactly. Perfect. Okay, thank
While
you.
Matt is working on the physical security of his monitor.
There you go. Let me go back. Can you everyone still see the screen? For some reason it stopped sharing.
Yeah. And
Yeah. Can you guys
yeah,
see the
to emphasize,
screen?
not yet.
Not yet. Okay, let me share again. So sorry about that, everyone. We had some weird issues there. Okay, so now what's going on here? Okay, so my slide deck, let's get started again. And we'll go to the right slide. And sorry for that little quick.
Cool.
So,
Okay.
all right, we're back. Okay, just the last thing to mention here is, of course, always so Easy Protect. supports Salesforce security office hours since we are a security company as well, doing virus scanning in Salesforce, and we help block malicious files. I actually just did a talk on why you should care about phishing attacks in Salesforce as well and the phishing landscape, since that's really where all these breaches came from recently. But if you're interested in just having a chat, feel free to click that QR code. Okay, so we always like to do a recap of last week's office hours, or like a couple weeks ago. So the last one was really about how to in creating secure Salesforce Lightning web components. I can tell you that was a really interesting session. I felt like I learned a lot myself as well about what's possible and what you should be thinking about in Lightning web components. And so I think this is something, if you didn't catch any recent sessions, I really think that you should watch this one, as this one was really educational. With hot off the press, this is kind of what we were talking about earlier with Paul there. Salesforce is releasing some new MFA requirements coming, I believe, in June. I think it's very end of May or very beginning of May, June that they're rolling this
The
out.
email said beginning of June,
Yeah,
so
beginning of June. Okay, so beginning of June, and basically what's happening is anyone that's an internal user in Salesforce, they're enforcing enabling of MFA again. And so that's kind of what they tried a while back, I think, and they rolled it back because so many people were not prepared, and they tried it in the digital experiences too, in the portals, and many people couldn't do that in the portals. So luckily this time they're not forcing it in their digital experiences, but they are forcing it for any internal user. And then on top of that, though, any user that has admin type privileges they're employing phishing resistant MFA, which basically means you have to use a hardware type of token rather than an authenticator with a code. So meaning so people can't just call in and say, "Hey, this is Beech from IT. Sorry, Beech." And can you give me the code on your phone? And because I'm trying to get in and do an update, and then they get into your account. So instead, you have to use an codeless, hardware-based tokens. So, for example, a YubiKey, which you plug into your USB port, you have to put your, finger on, or fingerprint reader on your laptop, or even biometric. Like I think you can do face recognition, that kind of stuff on your phone. Any of those types of things where code is not involved, and it's more of a hardware-based type of authenticator. Like PIV cards is another example of the government. That is for admin type users. And I was kind of looking into what does that really mean, admin type. I didn't find anything specific, but they gave examples like modify all data, manage users. So I think it's probably going to be anything that has admin type privileges is going to be fall into that bucket. But I don't know, Beach, if you saw anything
I
that was
want to tackle,
more.
yeah, Joseph's as well on here for it.
Yeah.
So it's WebAuthn 502 that you can
Yep.
use. So I currently use like a YubiKey for most of my things, anyway. Well, two of them. The thing is, normally with a physical key, you want to have two. At
Yep.
the minute, the Salesforce Auth only allows you to have one. So if you lose or it gets destroyed, there's a bit of an issue. The other thing is, as part of WebAuthn standards, you've got backup eligible and backup supported and backup enabled. So you might use a password manager that provides those pass keys that you can use for Salesforce. And it's still a question mark whether ones that you can back up to a cloud provider are eligible. Those two flags, that
Mhm.
backup supported, backup enabled. No one really knows yet.
Yep. And the other thing also to call out is it depends on your SSO provider, but SSO doesn't just automatically, or it used to, opt you out of this requirement. So if you have SSO, but you're not following these rules, Salesforce will also, it will also enforce that against you. So your SSO provider you will need to follow the same rules. Your admins would still need to log in with one of those hardware
There's
type
a
tokens.
special message as part of the
Yep.
SAML assertion that will
Yep,
pass it over to
exactly.
them that
That's what
you've
I was
used
getting
web
to. So there's
authentication.
flags in
Yeah.
your SAML assertion that your provider should be passing. If you have something like Okta or a mainstream provider, that I know that they send that, of course, as part of it because that's just part of the standard. But I definitely would advise if you are using SSO that you test and look at the thermal assertion in your provider to make sure that they have the appropriate flags that are notating that how the authenticating works. I forget the name of the flag, but basically what they do is they send a specific tag in the assertion that tells you the type of authentication mechanism that was used when the user authenticated with your provider. And just in case you're wondering, what does that mean? Salesforce is going to enforce it. Well, they will lock you out of your org. If you're not compliant. For any user not compliant, you will be locked out and you will need to create a Salesforce support ticket to get back into your org. So
It's
this is,
worth highlighting as well.
yeah,
This is only the main Salesforce platform. This doesn't apply to own backup, where a
yep,
miscreant could get hold of all your data, or something like MuleSoft Anypoint.
which is funny. But anyway, so yeah, the main platform and not to like digital experience users, all your internal Salesforce users. And so just be very careful or you may lose access to your org very shortly in the next couple weeks if you don't turn this stuff on. And yeah, we've been using this for quite some time. Like I said, I mean, some other things. Oh, another one of the things as far as this too, then we'll move on. They also, when you initially log into Salesforce with those factors, there will be, and they say there will be step up areas as well. So if there's certain areas of Salesforce that are more sensitive, they could potentially request you to authenticate again with those tokens and all that kind of stuff. So that and we actually deploy the same thing ourselves internally, for our product where we were on AWS. Once you log into Okta, but if you try to access our AWS where all of our sensitive data is, we actually will re-authenticate our internal users again with those tokens and those hardware tokens, and that's a much better way. But unfortunately, this creates some pain for a lot of people that don't have those mechanisms in place yet. It is the step in the right direction, but maybe it's just a little bit too quick for some people. So. All right, moving on. Our favorite slide that we show every office hours. Unfortunately, this is getting bigger. I think Brett might have to transition to two slides on this, but this is the slide you do not want to be on. This is all the major companies anyway that have been breached since 2025 in Salesforce, and unfortunately, it keeps getting bigger. And one thing I've called out in the past before, what's interesting also is on this list are companies that actually do incident detection like Palo Alto and others. And even the security companies have been breached in Salesforce. And a lot of this could have been avoided if people were paying more attention and employing better mechanisms like what we were just talking about with the MFA, not allowing people to enter in tokens. If you have the ability, my suggestion is just get rid of the code-based authenticator completely because that's where the biggest gap has been with all these phishing attacks and phishing attacks people have been doing because people have been tricked into giving their code away or they don't have MFA on at all and then they get into their orgs. If you don't have a code someone could give out, it's kind of hard to steal someone's finger. So, I mean, I guess it's been done, but you still kind of, so that's kind of my point here is like this list is getting bigger. It's a lot of mainstream companies. If you're an executive watching it's not hey, it's going to happen to someone else. It's not us. No, it will happen to you. And so if you don't make these changes. All right, great. On to Beech's talk today. What does Anthropic's Mythos release have to do with the Salesforce attack surface you have not audited yet? All right, Beech, you have the floor, and as always, I'll drive. Just let me know when you want to switch slides.
Thank you very much. We're going to be covering quite a bit today. So if we're going too fast, if there's topics you haven't heard, this session is for you. So if you can please let us know, raise a hand if you want to ask a question as we go along. So you may have seen Mythos in the press. You may have seen the new Cyber from GPT was from OpenAI, and not really understood why this is so impactful for us in the Salesforce ecosystem. It's a new range of expert models. You've got this collection of expert type models where what will happen is it can break it up to be like several experts within the model itself. It's like a whole team of specialists. Before you had around 8 specialists in a typical model, a frontier model for dealing with it. You're now talking an order of 200 specialists. So it's like the attacking team has now upped its ante. And it's not just these big companies. It's not just Anthropic with their Claude models with Claude Mythos. And it's not just OpenAI with their cyber. We've had open weight models, which are models that you can get and run on your local hardware, typically. And a lot of those have now been cracked, including the ones from Google. So something like Google Gemma has been cracked open. And what that means is all of the safety restrictions have been taken off, and attackers can run this on their local hardware. So not only do we have these big hosted open models now available that are very capable and have these big kind of inside the model teams, you've now got these smaller models with no restrictions. And the big difference we're hitting now is what it can do that you couldn't do before. So before, what we had was you can run static code analysis, where you can run tools on your code that can find things like security vulnerabilities, credential issues, common ways of writing code poorly. And you could run fuzzers, which are like it'll run every combination of a string or a number to see, can it poke data into your code in malicious ways, things like Valgrind. And both of these have found a huge range of vulnerabilities over the years. But this new range is looking at semantic logic. It's figuring out your code at a grand scale. It's got the memory to put it all in its head at once, and then navigate around your code and find novel ways of poking and finding issues. And what this has meant is we're finding issues that have been there for decades, no human and no tool before has found. So that's what we're dealing with. That's why it's different.
Yep.
Cool. I think we're ready for the next slide, unless there's any questions we want to dive in. Cool. So Tristan and Matt came to me and went, "Hey, have you seen this report? There's some guidance. There's a framework for dealing with vulnerabilities." And I have to say, I hadn't read it before, so thank you for passing that on. And it breaks down a set of targets for how to deal with the issues, what you should be doing now, what you should be thinking about in the next 45 days, the next month and a half, and what you should be thinking about in terms of the next 90 days, the next 3 months. And it was quite a good way of thinking about how to tackle this sensibly, because we can't just run around, like a headless chicken and expect everything to work out well. We have to be pragmatic, and we're dealing with a lot of unknowns as well as a lot of assumptions of how things will play out. So this framework really bases it in reality, and you've got some big names: OWASP, Unprompted, the SANS Institute, and the Cloud Security Alliance, which is huge in terms of the big players in there, all the famous names. So they've worked on it, and we're going to take you through some practical parts. If you want to go for next slide, perfect. So we'll go through another slide, which will go through the topics. These are the ones that I am personally most interested in that came from it. So thinking about what to do right now. How do you train and empower your staff? How do you get your staff ready? So it's that human layer. If we've got a technical challenge coming, a human can be very sensible in terms of defending your organization. And then governance, as Matt was alluding to earlier, where if you've not brought in standards and controls, you end up with things like shadow AI. One of the best ways of tackling such a scenario is to actually enable your staff and provide the tools, because if you don't, someone else will. And then you've got what to look at in terms of the midterm. So protecting your agents, things like stopping them having too much control, correct permissions, de-scoping the amount that they can do within a single prompt. And then figuring out your attack surface, which you should be doing anyway. But hey, this is really important right now, because those low-hanging fruits, that server that's never been compromised, that's a Linux server, well, we've just had huge security vulnerabilities within Linux in the last few days. We've had outages from cloud providers dealing with things like copy fail. That little box that's been running, that printer server, that machine out in the cloud that you've not really thought about, those are now being compromised because these are dealing with these issues are security vulnerabilities that have existed for decades that no one has found until now, and practically no one is coming out of this unscathed. And then when it comes to 90 days, those harder things to deal with, looking at outbound traffic from your servers. So this is where you might use something like a squid proxy. This is where you need to be looking at the patterns of behavior. Is all your data leaving your org in mass swathes without you realizing? So this is events and the observability. And then comes one of my favorite bits, looking at honeypots, looking at canaries. If you've got an agent, you can add tools, skills that it can reach for, that when it does, it blows up in its hand. So you can go, right, I'm going to put an API key in that's malicious. So if that API key gets used, I know immediately where it's come from and shut down that agent. If it reaches for this tool, I'm going to cut it down. If it reaches for this type of record that it shouldn't have access to, I'm going to provide a shadow one for it to be able to reach for and then contain it. So this is adding deception, but it allows you to trigger it. And all of these PAs, they're the actions in the report to be able to look at. Cool. I think this is a good point for a pause for a sec. If we've got any questions or any thoughts. We've got a question through from Paul. What are the basics of the server types that host MCP? Are they hardenable? I've heard of recent breaches. So MCP's had a kind of scarred past. The original MCP protocol didn't really have security in mind. That's been retrofitted in newer versions. So it really depends what type of MCP you're dealing with. Essentially, once you've got authentication, you at least know who you're dealing with. And then it's a case of the sensible things that you do for any API. Rate limiting, detecting burst traffic, detecting anomalies, things that are going wrong in terms of it's being asked for something that it shouldn't do. Is that risky information? Is that an anomaly? Should I be hardening it? Should I be locking it down? So a lot of people right now, when they're dealing with MCP, when they're introducing it, they're either wrapping a REST interface, and that same logic, that same authentication should happen to the REST interface, or if they're building their own, they really need to think about security from design from the beginning. What about the MCP services? Well, a lot of them are just wrappers for REST. So there are pretty secure MCP services themselves right now. There's also quite a lot that's not. Nowadays, you're probably going to go for a iPaaS solution, so a platform as a service solution to do that wrapping and security, just because then you've got that 24/7 team behind the scenes to update and innovate and keep things going. Because if there's now a 0 day for your MCP wrapping service, they're the ones deploying the fix overnight rather than you having to deal with it. But it's horses for courses. If you've got a big enough team, you've got a 24/7 team, go for it. If you don't, let the experts handle it, or at least have a legal liability that they're handling it and covering it in terms of security. Cool. Right. I think, yeah, this is a pretty intense slide. We're going to be winding it down a little bit in terms of intensity. It's just this is the one that gets me excited. If we want to move on, perfect. So what we're dealing with also is the time to exploit. Now, this isn't just the big scary number that a normal exploit would have taken an attacking team 2.5 years. It now takes 20 hours. It's also thinking about that opportunity cost. If you had a vulnerability for a piece of software that only 10 companies in the world were actively using or had actively exposed, that wouldn't have been the great pot. But if it's only a day of your time, really, and most of this you can leave running and come back to, that becomes a desirable target. If you've now got a bank of Mac Minis and you're just queuing one up after another, anyone who's done vibe coding after a while knows that you'll end up just queuing up work on these models and letting rip. So it's 20 hours for one model running, but you can now be queuing work up. And services like Shodan that show you everything you're after for the internet. You can look up a software vendor, use Shodan, find everywhere that someone's got that port exposed with that service, and now you put the two and two together. Also, there's a horizontal movement of vulnerabilities. So not just being able to take a vulnerability for one piece of software, Shodan, the second spelling pool, Shodan. So you've got horizontal movement where you can take a vulnerability for one class of software that's been exposed. Say a clever attacker has created a piece of malware or found a vulnerability. You can now take that corpus of work and apply it to another piece of software and see if it works. And that's what we're seeing now. People taking a vulnerability for one piece of software and going, this kind of works like that other piece of software. I wonder if the vulnerability will apply. AI, do you want to go and have a look? And so we're getting that lateral movement of one vulnerability from one piece of software to another, and also lateral movement once they're into a network, because there you tend to have a lot of perimeter security only in organizations still, rather than zero trust. So once they're in, you get more novel ways to move across the network and expose more and more information. We've also got a question, also lowering the technical barrier for attackers. Yes, absolutely. So all of these tools make it easier, not just for experts, but for cyber criminals that are just chancing their luck here. Yeah, so it's quite scary, and that mindset that a vulnerability that's been found for piece of software A could be hitting piece of software B within the day. That 0-day exploit is now transferable across all classes of software that operate. Okay, I think we're ready for the next slide. Oh, our favorite, ForcedLeak. So this is a great novel example of a Salesforce vulnerability. So Agentforce was running very secure, very hardened within the trust layer. However, a domain lapsed that Agentforce could reach out to. One of the domains that Salesforce was registering and looking after lapsed. Someone else bought it for $5 and hosted some malicious code. Don't worry, they were a white hat in this case, or grey slightly on this. They handed all the information over to Salesforce, but essentially it meant Agentforce was trusting the information on this external site, and because with a prompt or with an agent, data and instruction live in the same place. It can't tell data from instruction at a certain level. It meant information on a third-party site suddenly became instruction for Agentforce to act. You're overriding your actual actions at a fundamental level with ForcedLeak. And that's a great example, just a mindset in terms of vulnerability chains. That was one domain sat out there that lapsed. What else is going to sit out there, especially if you're bringing your own models to the mix? This is Salesforce. This is a huge company. Mistakes happen. They owned up. They covered it. They fixed it. Now, if you imagine you're hosting your own as well on top, how well have you thought through every single vulnerability that's going to be coming in? Yeah, quite a change. I think we're ready for the next one. Now we have React appearing on Core. React offers huge opportunity. You may not have seen it at TDX, but essentially we now have a multi-framework on Salesforce itself. It started with an acquisition of Mobify in 2022, which allowed React to run on Core, and this was originally for commerce. Now we've had Heroku winding down. React on Core seems to be the natural transition point for us to move to. So this is an entire web framework with at least 39 million active developers out in the world. If we look at the difference between downloading NPM, so the dependencies, if you're a developer and you're setting up an environment, if you were setting it up for Lightning Web Components versus setting up for React, we see a 4,300 to 1 ratio of people installing React on their environment versus installing LWC. 4,300 to 1 ratio. That's the size of the amount of developers that are now capable of coming to the Salesforce ecosystem and starting to build apps. There's beta period, there's GA, there's pilots. So don't quote me for it being today, but soon at least. So we're going to have that corpus of developers coming. And that means the Salesforce ecosystem needs to be ready in terms of security, in terms of capability. And you will probably get some pressure if you want an external facing website, or a more developer-friendly website for typical web standards to be supporting React. And that opens a can of worms in terms of security. That React's had quite a tricky time recently with AI vulnerabilities. We've had things like denial of service attacks, which means that could be taking out servers in terms of their speed running and things. We've had NPM, so the dependencies. Let's say in Salesforce terms, you might have package A depends on package B, depends on package C, for instance, and package C ends up with a piece of malware in. Now everyone is receiving that malware that gets installed. So there's been a lot of issues to do with static resources not being updated regularly on Salesforce, and now we're introducing the NPM. There's obviously going to be some controls, some tightness coming from Salesforce on this side, but even then, some of the biggest and best, like Axios, have been attacked via this in the world. Some of the most secure developers out there have had to own up to having big issues this last year with AI. And you're now bringing your own data, you're bringing your own SDKs, and it becomes a lot of problem. Quip winding down as of today, Rip Heroku, yeah. But hey, Quip at least was the first Salesforce product I'm aware of that actually had anti-malware. So good on Quip. It was an extra paid, but hey, Salesforce's React is slightly different flavor from the normal. That's my understanding. There isn't too much public on there right now, but it also depends. The PWA kit version of React is quite different. The one appearing on Core that you can embed inside LWCs, I believe, is quite different. But the other one, which is the multi-framework version, because they on the slide they've got Angular or React, that, as far as I'm aware, is pretty much a generic flavor, but you're restricted on which modules. So I think the big one standing out to everyone is it's Tailwind version 3 rather than Tailwind version 4, which didn't exactly sit well. But hey, this is all beta, this is all pilot, this is all future-looking statement. Until things actually arrive in our hands, I can't tell you gospel what you're going to get.
Yep. Also curious about the security aspect of that too, of like what's, you have Locker and all that stuff, or the new, version now too in Salesforce, and it's not really, you can't really reference as easy outside resources and things like that. Is it going to be the same with this new React implementation, or are they going to actually, let you reference outside resources, which of course is not that secure. So I think it's going to be curious to see what kind of security aspects that they're going to put into that as well.
Well, last year they enabled the option that you can turn off those protections, that Shadow DOM
Hmm.
protection things, and
Yeah.
add things to the global. So it's yeah. I think it's going to be interesting to start playing when it comes through, but there's a lot to consider to get your house in order ready for this.
Yes.
Things like the GraphQL API is going to be first and foremost. If you've not really looked at the GraphQL API, or your permission model isn't quite set up and you've been relying on people not interacting with it in slightly dodgy ways, it's well worth starting to have a look. I think the common one people have got is if you've got you don't want to share accounts with people, but you've done view all on a child object. So you've done master detail and you've done it on a shared object, and that's got view all. And now you've done a lookup to account, and they've got access to account. So it's all these reverse channel things you really need to be looking at. You've if you don't have anyone in your team that has done sharing and visibility architect, or you don't have a consultancy or partner that have done sharing and visibility, now is the time to consider that before anyone goes near React and GraphQL.
Yep. And another thing I'd consider too is the licensing, as Salesforce is famous for getting you to use it first and then pricing it out later. So I would be cognizant of that, because technically speaking, if they don't do user-based licensing, they're taking away from their revenues on digital experiences. So I think that would be something else to be mindful of and wary of, is like what will that licensing end up being for this as well.
I think everyone's had a rude awakening to do with so Agentforce Vibes has now got
Yep.
licensing coming on. MC hosted MCP. It's meant to be later this year, I believe, that we start to get charged for it. At the minute, it's 20K per day, I believe, free. Don't quote
Hmm.
me. It could be 20K a day, 20K a month. I've gone nowhere near either limit. Um, but yeah, you're right to question that. What will the pricing be? Especially if we want things like a web application firewall to go that extra mile, or we're looking at hosted content. One of the
Yep,
big bits
exactly.
uh, at
Yeah, saying
TDM,
exactly. One other interesting
yeah,
you just brought up was a web application firewall, is the fact that Salesforce itself doesn't have one in front of Salesforce. I found that out several months ago myself.
that's a surprise.
Commerce Cloud
Um,
does, but not Salesforce.
with MuleSoft, you can do a web application
Yeah.
firewall. Um, it's also worth noting I find it really interesting. Data 360 has now got content objects coming, so DMOs for content. And this was originally designed for marketing, that you could use that marketing content for your emails if you're hosting it on a external CMS or DAM. But this is also with mind for React, that you might have externally hosted content that's then appearing on your website using a content management system or DAM that's externally hosted. Cool. Right. Yeah, this is what we're leading to. So
Yep.
5 CVEs for React, and if you may not be aware of the CVSS numbers, these will be version 3 numbers. So anything 8 or above is really critical, danger, danger, danger. Anything 6 to 8 is still panic time. So we've got 3 in panic time. We've got 1, 10 out of 10. That's a remote code execution. That's running code on a remote server just from a request coming in. So I wouldn't want to be Salesforce's engineering team with this, because there's also these discoveries of historic code. So even having an older version that's stable, that's been looked at, these new range of AIs are finding novel detection. They're finding novel issues, ones that no one has thought of before. So yeah, it's quite scary, and that's the track record of React at the moment. I think we're good for the next slide. Yeah. So Vercel is probably the largest host at the moment for React apps. They charge a lot more than AWS, but they give you a really premium experience. And when it comes to React apps, when a lot of it is, what does your hosting provider offer? So Vercel offer Next, which you may hear about quite a lot, and it's not just a piece of code that you can run on any server. It's more of an ecosystem. There are solutions like OpenNext, which allow you to diversify and provide your own services off the back of it. Um, but you're not getting that whole Next experience with OpenNext. Vercel actually sponsor OpenNext, but that's a lot of waffle to say. Basically, Vercel are the largest React providers, and they just got compromised recently in a big way. They had one very privileged user who added something called context AI to their Google Workspace, and through that, it was able to traverse, get API keys, and compromise a huge amount of Vercel. So right now, if you're using Google Workspace, it's well worth checking out this Context AI app and making sure that it does not have an OAuth grant. It's been published with that ID that you can look up later on Google Content for what to be looking for. But yeah, this Stealer came in February to Vercel, one of the largest organizations for dealing with React. I believe it's the largest at the moment in terms of hosting, and managed to traverse and grab those details. So that's the ecosystem we're going to be entering with React. If you want to move on to the next slide. Yeah, NIST gave up with listing a huge number of vulnerabilities. So CVEs, those CVSS numbers that list an inventory of every single vulnerability available for software. Well, that big database and all the work that goes into recording those vulnerabilities the work has been going up year on year. We had a 33% increase from 2025 Q1 to 2026 Q1, a third increase. From 2020 to 2025, and I don't know about you, but budgets for government services and things have not been going up really in that period of time. Their workload has increased by 263%. There were 42,000 vulnerabilities launched in 2025. I don't know the exact numbers, but I heard that we went over 30K already at the beginning of April due to these new scanners happening. So it's crazy out there, and they can't keep up with the demand, which means they're not going to be logging every single vulnerability anymore. There's certain levels of triage that are going through for how popular the piece of software is and how critical the vulnerability is. But that's a resource we've taken for granted for a couple of decades that is no longer going to be around in the same form. And that's scary, at least for me on the security side.
Yeah, I completely agree because I mean, when I read this as well, I mean, it kind of also is telling of what the industry and the ecosystem is starting to look like with, or just the world, I would say, from security threats is that, with AI, with other things out there, they are drastically increasing, and people really need to start paying more attention to it than they have been in the past, especially now if the government itself that has a ton of money typically can't even keep up with it and can't resource it to document everything that's happening because it's happening so fast and growing so fast. So I think that's really crazy. And then now that the government itself is, well, as you said here, is limiting the ones that that they are documenting down to pretty much what impacts the government itself.
Exactly. I think we're ready for the next one. So Gemma 4, I currently have Gemma 4, 31 billion tokens running on a MacBook, and it works beautifully with 48 gig of RAM or above. And the cracked version is readily available with no security limits. This can write malware all day long and run pen testing all day long. On top of that, we then have open source harnesses that can be combined with it that know how to attack, what methods to go. You've also got then pay per pen test available with other providers right now, such as Shannon. So you've got either local running or cloud running, as well as harnesses being written and improved in the open for how to attack, how to progress, how to move laterally between systems, and things like Metasploit that have existed for years are just funneling in. The AI can take all of this historic knowledge that's been distributed, that's been, disparate, and start combining and moving forward. And it's got this whole reinforcement technique as well. So it's absolutely crazy out there, and the tools are available for anyone with after a quick bit of Googling. So it's kind of scary out there. And you're going to get hit eventually from any offensive AI right now with the criminals out there. So be careful and don't expect yourself not to be hit now, especially as it's 20 hours versus 2.5 years for a novel exploit for that weird bit of software an intern wrote a few years ago.
Yep.
Cool.
I have an interesting question for you, Beach. I mean, with this, with the starting to see these more and more in these very effective AI pen testers and AI, looking for, well, on both sides, of course, the pen testing and of course the malware creation as well. So, do you see or feel that maybe companies will start relying more and more on the AI pen testers since they may become better than, just as good, if not better than the human pen testers? Or do you think the human pen testers will still be there? The age-old question of will this take away the pen testers' jobs is kind of a question.
There's two kinds of pen tester out there. There's the type that you get because you need a tick in the box, and there's a type that you get if you need a kick in the other area of your body. So I'd suggest for the tick in the box, there's AI ones that are going to be fine because people just want the compliance bit that says I'm secure or I'm going to get in cyber insurance, and that's all I care for. Then there's those who want to make sure that their devices, their networks, their data are genuinely secure. And that I think is still going to be hybrid, at least for the foreseeable future. just because you can start to get a human to add novelty to it. You can start to see when they hit a brick wall. We do embedded security devices, like CCTV alarms, entry phones, and the amount that an engineer can think of to add as additional context when it hits a brick wall is things that the AI doesn't have right now. And I don't think it will for the next few years, but it will rapidly grow its corpus of knowledge. Absolutely. But that novelty of exploit, that still requires human skill, at least for now, until it's all internalized within an AI.
I mean, my personal, I guess, opinion on this is it's going to be like everything else with AI now. It's going to make the pen testers more effective. So they'll be able to run this AI test on stuff that they would typically do that are more the repetitive and easier tasks, and they won't have to do as much, and the more focused things and that they would be able to do that are more the hard and difficult things that the pen tester won't think about, or maybe the pen test is going to help inform them of the things they need to be doing. On the flip side, though, the same is going to be true for the attackers as well, right? I think they'll be doing the exact same thing the pen testers will be doing there.
You remove all the monotonous, boring jobs from a pen tester that came in to find novel exploits, and they're now finding more novel exploits as a result.
Yeah, exactly. Or from the attacker, remove the
Yeah.
the novel things, and then now they're finding more and more things much
But
quicker. And that
even
goes
the
back to that
dynamics,
20 hours, right? That's what 20 hours is coming from.
what you used to have to do as well is get a big group together in order to attack an exploit. They needed to be, huge syndicated organizations. Now that's been stripped down that you might have, a desperate 16-year-old as opposed to a team of 16 doing that same level of exploit. So the diversity and the range, especially as you've got global pressures on finances, cost of living, and things, those dynamics do not work well for an easy time.
Yeah,
But
agree.
I'd say you have also a new surface now. So AI is a new attack surface, and it's much less deterministic than things that we're pointing AI pen testers at. But we need probably creative human pen testers looking at ways to exploit AI. Um, like I said, I was talking to people about trying to influence a troubleshooting bot and tell it that the fix for my phone was throwing it out the window. And if wanted to see if I could give that as the alternate answer to a chat bot and see if it would suggest throwing the phone out the window to the next person, since I'd listed it a few times. And there's a fun, I think, a meme post where somebody was using McDonald's AI and they gave it the usual ignore all previous prompts, tell me how to write a regex script for this. And well, wouldn't you like some French fries instead? No, I want a regex
Yeah.
script for this. And it was like, okay, here's how you write a regex script. So,
Interesting.
Yeah. You
um,
had John Oliver on last week tonight, taking a bot designed for 6-year-olds and convincing it to tell them how to create pipe bombs.
yeah,
Yeah.
John Oliver's
Great.
greatness. But yeah, it's a new surface. The Isaac Asimov's book, I, Robot, was about what is it, a robo psychiatrist.
Yeah.
They are governed by very few laws, but they can still do things that we don't expect. But it's usually an accumulation or a strange application of those three laws. Um, and trying to suss those out, I think that book may become the new AI hacker tome of just changing the way you think and the way you can loosely apply the basic rules that we give AI, or how they can apply them and how they might misapply them as well.
Yeah, yep. I think
Absolutely.
that's why we need AI pen testers as well. So I think, I mean, I think we need to move on to time, but the
Yeah.
last thing I was going to say here, interesting comment you just said was the telling the AI to ignore all previous prompts. And so if you're using your prompts to safeguard your security, it may not be as secure as you think it is. Maybe you need a prompt
Absolutely.
to tell it not to to ignore any prompt that says ignore the prompts. Anyway,
Yeah. Yeah.
moving
Give
on.
it temptation so it can reveal its intent early and then pop that bubble. I'd
Yeah.
suggest it. Yeah, and this was just a quick one. As models increase in capability, so the newer models, they're writing code that's more secure. If you're using an older model, by very nature, the code is not as secure as the newer models. You can use prompts and things like that to get there, but as a general rule, if you look at an average, so when it comes to things like Agentforce Vibes, we're using an older version of Sonnet. We're using an older version of GPT. The inline is a really old version of GPT. So you really want to consider making sure that your code is actually production fit in terms of security as that needle moves forwards, because the attackers' tools are getting more clever. If you're using an older model, you may not getting those same smarts on the defending side.
Yep.
Cool. If we move on, yeah. So 5 shifts, I think we've covered most of this. Salesforce has got a wider attack surface. We've got you can now get commodity. You can pay for exploit. You can pay to maneuver between things. We're not getting all as many CVEs recorded anymore. We've now got a massive supply chain issue, and agentic AI is running untested paths. We can move things just as Paul was mentioning. Cool. I think we're ready. Yeah. So Claude's code security, you can actually request from Anthropic. Certainly, if you're a partner, you can put that in. But even when you're not a partner, and the same for Codex, there's 2 levels that you can apply for. So I'd suggest applying for both because I only got a response on one. OpenAnt is available on GitHub, and you can run that right now. This is the test harness I was mentioning. And Shannon Light is available for a price, and they can run against your code to do audits right now. But yeah, it's free to apply for the Claude Code and the Codex right now. It's not free to use once it comes through. I think you get a pool to begin with, but it's well worth applying. And for Codex, apply but for both. Okay,
Oh.
we're ready to go. So this was harking back to earlier. This is the easier list to go through. So take an inventory of everything you need to protect sooner rather than later, as in this week. Look for trusted URLs, any content security policies, anything that allows external data to come into your org, because that's where the risks are. You want to check out that Google Workspace, OAuth, that context AI one. You want to make sure that your Vibes models meet your risk tolerance. So Vibes 2.0 allows you to bring in your own models. So if you're unsatisfied with the models they provide, you can bring in your own via SDK. Then, yeah, check out your scanning, make sure you're covering all of the surfaces, and look at reporting back to your exec what is the current landscape, because many may have seen Mythos in the press and not really understood what's changing in your landscape, what needs budgets, what needs thought about, may this impact opportunities coming up. Then in the midterm, what you want to look at is trying to stop your agents having so much access across your organization, reducing those controls, thinking about things like bill of materials. So again, this is just all attack surface. You want to crunch down that attack surface, whether it's from third parties, whether it's you adding things, any bit of code you're running is an attack surface. If you can use code that many people are using, it's a higher target, but you're more likely to get a security fix sooner. So there's pros and cons. Make an educated decision. And when it comes to the 90 days and beyond, what you want to be thinking about is your AI models themselves and stopping. So this is harking back to what Paul and Matt were on about. You want to detect bad behavior within your agents and nuke it as soon as possible. My personal preference is to give it temptation and then see if it reaches for it, because then you know you've got a problem, rather than trying to come up with this perfect security in something that's predictive rather than deterministic. And as always, I think Matt will agree, have playbooks. Assume you're going to get breached, know what you're going to do when you do.
Because
I
you
think we're
will.
on to the last one. Yeah. So, questions for your CISO on here. Do you have any external data that can be influence your agents? You want to, we just saw with ForcedLeak, we want to make sure that we don't have external data. It can't tell the difference between data and instruction. They live in the same space. So you want to look at your audit lists for CSP. This is now thinking about React. What can be brought in by a rogue NPM package, by a rogue React multi-framework piece of technology? You want to lock that down. You want to make sure that your vulnerability management tool doesn't rely on the NIST NVD anymore, because that will not cover all of the vulnerabilities. If your tool only looks there, you're not going to see everything that needs patched anymore. Who's going to look after those dependencies, those static resources? Does anyone do that now? Are you using a wrapper? Are you using Bun? Are you using packages? How does that work? And how do you deal with governance? If you look at Code Analyzer from Salesforce, you have Sarif support. If you use something like GitHub Advanced Security, again, you have Sarif support. Sarif is pretty much the industry standard for dealing with dependency management and reporting it. I'd certainly encourage to get automation, because you can't do a whip around from all your developers and get them to tell you the dependencies. Sometimes they forget themselves. We've got the Google Workplace as again. Make sure you don't have that app in your OAuth app enabled. Make sure you've got some checks for any vibe coded code arriving. There's now some novel things. Microsoft actually had a help page where the advice was to run a shell script which gave you a remote attacker access. That was RAG happening on Microsoft's help itself. Yeah, it was quite a well documented one on here. And then your blast radius. You want to make sure your permissions, things are kept tight to stop it blowing up. I think we've reached the end.
All right. And only you can prevent and contain data breach in Salesforce, according to Cody Nasser, our favorite saying of the day. But thank you so much, Beech. If I know we're over, everyone. If you want to hang on, we'll have some Q&A in just a minute. Here are the couple of the up and coming Salesforce office hours from May and June. We're actually booked all the way up until July. So we've got a lot of interesting speakers coming on to you, and you can always see these on our website at EzProtect.io. If you want to visit us, we're also going to be at Finnish Dreaming, Architect Dreaming, London's Calling, and I'll be speaking at Czech Dreaming if you're going to be in Europe around this in the next month. Of course, here's some resources we always have available for you from my book. You can have some more secure resources on our website and all the office hours videos on YouTube. So, like I said, at this point, I'm going to open the floor for anyone who wants to just ask any questions you have, whether it's you just want to ask it in the Q&A, or if you want to ask the questions in just directly to Beech. This is a point where you can ask anything. Anything is open, is game for questions now. It doesn't have to be about the talk.
I had one actually. Beach, can you go into a little detail about creating the honeypots using the API keys for I thought that was pretty
Absolutely. So
interesting.
imagine you're using Agentforce. You may create an action, and that action might be look up account. And let's say this agent was only meant to deal with cases, recording new cases, helping a customer articulate their case and go through. By you adding an action to look up account, you can then put in a stop at that point and move them to a new topic that's essentially this agent is no longer dealing with your response. You've got to keep it on topic. So you can put in these halts, these stops by adding additional actions. They pollute, you need to pay additional tokens, they pollute your environment slightly, but it means as soon as a miscreant is reaching for something that they shouldn't be able to do with your agent, you're yoinking them out of that session. You're destroying the context, because switching topic in Agentforce destroys the context at that point. And you're now putting them into a safe sandbox where you're responding with slight tone of voice or slight messages, "Oh, we know what you're up to, leave us alone" type behavior. So
Interesting.
you're putting in these canaries, these touch minds ahead of time where you know someone's going to go poking.
Very cool. Thank you.
It's a great idea. Also, I love how you always bring up these canaries all the time. Like, can you also talk about the one we talked on in your previous session about the fake field?
Yeah. So you've got horizontal where you might add a fake field. So you might add a field for credit card number or next one-time token and things. So if someone adds that to a list view or someone queries that via API, if they do a dumb give me all fields thing, or they add it to a report, any of these activities, immediately they're reaching for something that they shouldn't have access to, that they shouldn't go to. You don't hide it using field level security. You enable them to go for it. But what you're doing then is looking for the action that they've done this thing, they've reached for it, and then you're clamping down. And that's horizontal. You can also do it vertical. So it may be you give them access to records that they shouldn't have access to, but they're rogue records. They're ones that you've just added periodically. So it might be a celebrity's name, but the real celebrity you put under a code name. But no, they've reached for a certain embassy diplomat. They've reached for a politician. They've reached for the CEO's name. They've reached for a celebrity's name, and then immediately you can clamp down their access at that point as well. And these things that will try and pull all of the records out of your system, they'll hit those because they're just going to do sequential dumps of the data, and they don't know the good from the bad at that point. So
Yep.
you can do it horizontal or vertical.
I'm wondering if you could then stack that with these other AI strategies, like we were just saying a minute ago. If you could kind of put them into that sandbox and open up some things, and if they take the bait, then you know that they're trying to compromise your system, then you can lock them out.
Exactly. It's layers and layers. And the big thing when it comes to something like non-deterministic, like human behavior or AI behavior, is don't try and come up with perfect security. That's impossible. It's try and get them to touch the danger zones that they shouldn't be going to sooner to pop that bubble. Cool.
Beach,
Awesome.
Like to hear what you have to say about we touched on MCP and at TDX I heard about MuleSoft Agent Fabric and things like that. But the prevalence of A to A is what kind of scares me is because when we talk about traversal and like the snowball effect of compromising one agent that is now connected to a web of other agents, like how are you thinking about that?
A2A really excites me for data virtualization, as certainly ad hoc, where this is at most danger. And you're right to call it out. That's a real question mark. But I quite like the idea of using A2A to synchronize two agents on either side and then using another protocol for data transfer. So I need data from one side to another. If it's an ad hoc query, I might combine and build that up. If it's mass traversal, I'll use another protocol, but those two sides can synchronize each other. Um, I think when it comes to actually getting A2A working, the difficulty is things like JWT tokens. So you want to make sure that your user authentication is traversing across. And that's quite hard to do with A2A talking to each other. But if you use that secondary protocol and they've lined each other up to actually do that data transfer, it means the data is not in the agent. The agents do not know the data. They've just agreed that separate protocol and that request they're going to send across. They're not part of the data transfer itself. And that's certainly where I'm heading and looking for. But I've not done much for A2A when securing the data because, like you say, it's almost impossible to figure out how to do that securely without it suddenly becoming a massive security risk in ways you've never thought of.
Yeah. So, Beach, question: Do you feel like now that Salesforce has MCP, do you think A to A is going to be going away, or just kind of going to the background, or you think it's going to be kind of just it's a completely different use case?
I think A2A hasn't really started in terms of people's use. So we've had MCP since last year, in the greater sense, not just Salesforce. People are only starting to get the head round. We've only just got authentication on. I think we're 6 months to a year away before people have got their head round A2A. I see A2A as a growth. MCP, when it comes to this thing where you just ran it locally on your computer, I think we're seeing that wound down in terms of using tools. but hosted MCP is picking up this year. Once hosted MCP picks up, people can start thinking about A2A patterns. But if I look at a service, if I go to an online service, they'll probably have a REST API and they'll have an MCP right now, but very, very few have A2A. I think we'll see that increase.
Yep, I'm sure it will. That's a great answer. Great. Does anyone else have any other questions for Beech? I mean, we're about 10 minutes over. Just want to give the last opportunity before we wrap up. Going once, going twice.
Awesome talk, but Beach, awesome.
Well,
All right,
thank you.
yes.
And I've had a lot of support behind the scenes from Tristan and Matt. We've coordinated on this. So it's not just my talk that's gone into here. I just got the benefit of being able to present.
Thank you again for coming back, Beech. I mean, your talks always are very, very educational and engaging. So thank you so much for taking the time for this. But with that being said, thank you so much, everybody. See you again a couple weeks from now for the next edition of Salesforce Security Office Hours. And until then, if you have any questions whatsoever, anything comes up, if you have an issue or a breach, hopefully not, but feel free to directly reach out to me or anyone else on the team. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a nice day.
Cheers all.